Good afternoon, class. We're going to continue our lecture series for emergency medical responder for Wilcox County. Lecture 3 is going to be about medical, legal, and ethical issues. Let's go ahead and get started. Introduction. Laws differ from state to state, so EMRs should learn specific laws that apply to their locality. Important concepts for medical legal: do no harm, provide all care in good faith, and provide proper, consistent care while maintaining your composure. Maintaining your composure is so important. If you're not able to maintain your composure, the whole system could fall apart. You've got to be able to keep it together. If you can keep it together, everybody else will remain calm. If you can't, everybody's going to lose their mind. So, duty to act. What is a duty to act? This means if you belong to an agency and are dispatched to the scene of an accident or illness, you have a duty to act. You must respond to the scene in a timely manner and provide medical care up to your level of training. Failure to respond or render care leaves you vulnerable to legal action. This is a little different for volunteer agencies. You're not bound by any real duty to respond. However, if you do get on scene and you make contact, you have a duty to act. So, it's a little different, but ultimately it's still the same. So, standard of care. Standard of care is the manner in which you must act or behave. Uh, you must meet two criteria. You must treat the patient to the best of your ability. You must provide care that is a reasonable, prudent person with a similar training would provide. That just means if you and I both have the same amount of training and we respond to a similar patient, you're going to be expected to do the same thing that I would do, considering that I am a prudent, normal provider. It's just something to measure your treatment versus my treatment against. All right, so scope of care. Scope of care is defined by the USDOT's EMR educational standards. Medical protocols or standing orders, online medical control. It just means that there's a set scope that you need to treat your patients within, and if you go outside of that scope, you can be held liable. Ethical responsibilities and competence. Treating a patient ethically means doing so in a manner that conforms to an accepted professional standard of conduct. Stay up to date on skills and knowledge. Review your performance and assess your techniques. Evaluate your response times. Try to follow up on patient outcomes if you can. Take continuing education courses. Participate in quality improvement activities. Ethical behavior requires honesty. Always provide complete and correct reports to other EMS providers. Never change a report except to correct an error. This just goes in line with everything we stand for as a profession. If you're changing your reports because you made an error on patient care, that's completely wrong. If you're changing your report because you made an error on a report, that's a completely different story. So just keep that in mind. Consent for treatment. Consent simply means giving approval or permission. Express consent. The patient actually tells you they're okay with you treating them. The patient must be of legal age and able to make a rational decision. Implied consent. The patient does not specifically refuse care, so don't hesitate to treat patients that are unconscious, even if they can't verbally consent to care. Consent for minors. Under law, minors are not considered capable of making medical decisions. All right, let's continue with consent for treatment. Consent of patients with mental illness. So, if a person appears to be a threat to the self or others, place this person under medical care. Know your state's legal mechanism for handling these patients. Don't hesitate to involve law enforcement if you need to. All right, refusal of care. A competent adult has the right to refuse care if they want to. Um, you can try to help the patient understand the consequences of refusing care by explaining the treatment, the reason the treatment is needed, the potential risks if treatment is not provided, any alternative treatments that might help. Patient refusal should be documented on your PCR record according to agency protocols. All right, advanced directives. An advanced directive is a document that specifies what a person would like to be done if he or she becomes unable to make his or her own decisions. A living will is a written document that states the medical care of a person once withheld. A durable power of attorney allows a patient to designate another person to make healthcare decisions for them. DNR, or do not resuscitate orders. Um, it's a written request for medical professionals not to attempt resuscitation in the event of a cardiac arrest. If you are unable to determine the validity of an advance directive, begin emergency care. All right, abandonment. Abandonment occurs when a trained person begins care and then leaves the scene without handing over patient care to another provider or equal greater training. So this would be if you decided to respond to a scene, you get there, and for whatever reason you decide you got better things to do and you leave the scene without handing the care over to another another provider of equal or greater care. So that could be another EMR, it could be EMT, it could be a paramedic. But you can't abandon the patient once you make contact with them. You've gotta continue care. That's just the right thing to do. All right, people dead at the scene. As an EMR, unfortunately, you're going to come in contact with people or persons that are dead at the scene prior to your arrival. If you see any signs of life at all, you should start providing care. If you find any of the following things, it can be assumed that the patient is dead. If they're decapitated, if their head is removed from their body, this is obviously not sustainable with life. If you find a rigor mortis, that's not sustainable with life. The big thing with that is to make sure you confirm it in two joints or more, just to make sure this is consistent throughout the body and not just an isolated stiff limb. Tissue decomposition, you got a patient that's been out in the environment for an extended period of time and they're starting to compose. Obviously, that's not compatible with life. Dependent lividity, this is something that happens a lot quicker than tissue composition, but is also a pretty obvious sign of death. This means when blood pools in the lowest spots of your body, and this is dependent on the position of the patient. If they're supine, which means they're laid on their back, blood's going to pool in the buttocks, lower back, just anything that's at the lowest point in relation to the ground is where the blood's going to pool. All right, negligence. Negligence occurs when a patient sustains further injury or harm because the care is administered did not meet the standard. These conditions must be present. There has to be a duty to act. So, as a provider, you have to actually have a duty to act. Then there has to be a breach of that duty. Breach of that duty has to result in injuries, and then there has to be proximate cause. All right, confidentiality. Most patient information is confidential. This includes patient history, assessment findings, the treatment provided, the communication you have with this patient. Info should be shared only with other medical personnel that are directly involved in the patient care. HIPAA, or Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1966, strengthens this law for protection of the privacy of health information. This is especially true in smaller communities. We all know each other. We don't need each other's information being broadcasted throughout the community just because they were involved in a crazy or interesting situation. It's just not the way to do business. Good Samaritan Good Samaritan laws protect citizens from liability from errors or omissions in giving good faith emergency care. They vary considerably from state to state. They provide little or no legal protection for an EMS provider. Some people say there's no point in these laws just because they're not terribly effective at what they were meant to be for. So there's calls for them to just be removed altogether. Right now they're still in place, but just keep in mind that they don't have a whole lot of teeth when it comes to protecting you. All right, regulations. Be familiar with federal, state, local, and agency-specific regulations that affect your job. Certification or registration may be required to work as the EMR. You're responsible for keeping certification or registrations current. All right, reportable events. These are crimes that occur that as providers were required to report to law enforcement. They include knife wounds, gunshot wounds, motor vehicle collisions, suspected child or elder abuse, domestic abuse, dog bites, rapes. You need to learn which crimes are reportable in your area and know which agencies procedures for and know your agency's procedures for reporting these crimes. Failure to report the crimes may result in sanctions against you or your agency. All right, crime scene operations are very delicate. Many emergency medical services scenes are also crime scenes. Keep these considerations in mind. You got to protect yourself first of all. If a scene is unsafe, wait at a safe location until law enforcement tells you that the scene is safe for entry. Your first priority after your own safety is patient care. However, you've gotta work, with the police officers and try to make it so they can still do their job too. Some considerations to take. Now, when you're assessing the scene, document anything that seems unusual. Move the patient only if necessary. Touch only what you need to touch to gain access to the patient. Preserve the crime scene for investigation. Do not cut through knife or bullet holes in clothing. Be careful when you place equipment. Keep non-essential people away. Work with law enforcement on scene. Write a short report about the incident. So, like I said, this is law enforcement scene. We have to go there and, obviously patient care comes first. But they also have a job to do, and you want to be able to maintain the integrity of their scene by not disturbing it. You got to work with your partners, do your job, but allow them to do their job as well. Right, documentation. Documentation is an initial account describing the patient's condition and the care administered. Serves as a legal record for your treatment. Provides a basis for evaluating the quality of care provided. Should be clear, concise, accurate, and readable. Documentation must include the following: condition of the patient when found, patient's description of illness or injury, patient's initial and repeat vital signs, treatment you provided, agency and personnel that took over patient care, any reportable conditions that are present. All right, let's go over a brief summary. As an EMR, you have the duty to act when you are dispatched to a medical call as part of your duties. Like I said before, this is a little different for volunteers, but if you go on scene, you then have a duty to act. You should understand the difference between express consent, implied consent, consent for minors, consent of patients with mental illness, and the right to refuse care. Advanced directives gives a patient the right to have care withheld. You should be familiar with abandonment, negligence, and confidentiality. Be aware that crime scenes are a complex environment. Your job is not complete until all of your paperwork is done. Understanding and following these concepts will help make you an effective, great EMR.